Hello, everybody, and welcome to Nathan on Shuffle and to my latest Top 5 episode. This is the show where I give a Top 5 list off the top of my head of some topic in progressive rock or related genres, usually either generated by my wife or from things that I see on YouTube from other of my fellow YouTubers out there. Just topics that come to mind that I thought would be fun to share with you guys, and mostly an excuse to let you guys give your impressions in the comments and let me know your top 5 lists and things that I may have missed on my list that you guys want to bring up. It's a fun way for the community to kind of discuss this topic all together. So today is one I've been a little bit nervous to do because I don't want to go negative. As I've discussed in many of my videos, I'm a very positive person and I like to promote and talk excitedly about new music, so I tend to just not talk about things that aren't really my favorites. But here I wanted to talk about something because I thought this was an interesting angle to this topic. And this is bands that I should love but just don't for whatever reason. This, to me, the topic is on paper, based on what people describe the band as, you know, who they sound like, what kind of genre they're in. It just seems like this should be a band that I absolutely should fall in love with. But for some reason, I just can't connect with it, and it just never becomes quite on my favorites list. And a lot of these bands I'm going to be talking about, I have several records from them. I enjoy several records from them. I enjoy specific songs, specific eras of their catalog, but it's just a band I haven't fully been able to embrace for whatever reason. There's a little bit of a barrier that keeps me from just fully embracing these bands, and it's hard for me to even explain what that is, but I'm going to attempt to and try to do that for this video. So let me know in the comments on this one. I think this could be a fascinating one to see other people's perspective of bands that on paper, because you love progressive rock like I do, this should be a band that you just should really be into, but for whatever reason you just can't stand them, or you just can't get into it, or it's just not your favorite. I'd be interested to know. So these are some, and this based largely upon like what my fellow YouTubers who have similar tastes as me, what bands they're super into, but just I feel a little left out of the conversation because I'm just not as into it. So the first one, I'm going to rattle through a couple honorable mentions that I thought of. I went through my music catalog and list of bands and just pulled out the ones that I think qualify for this topic. I thought about including King Gizzard and the Lizard Wizard, kind of a newer group, but they have like 1 million albums to their name already because they put out albums at an incredible pace, and I just haven't been able to connect with their music, even though I like the fact that they're so diverse. Every record of theirs is a little bit different. They kind of have a jam band feel. They have records that lean more into like a psych element, a jazzy element, more of a harsher, more metal element at times. You know, they run the gamut between a lot of different things, which I think would be cool, but I just haven't really been able to fully embrace them. I just haven't found that album that really connects with me and with them, and I just feel a little bit out of the loop when people talk about them. Devin Townsend is another artist that people rave about. Maybe it's because I'm not a big fan of the harsher vocals and the more extreme metal style that he can delve into. And I guess similar to King Gizzard, maybe I have struggles with artists who just have such a wide-ranging discography of different styles and different types of things. I just have a hard time to just figure out who the artist is at their core and like really find something to latch onto. Maybe I like an album or two from them, but there's just so many different types of things that there's bound to be albums that just don't connect with me also. I thought also about Glass Hammer in this discussion, which is a band I've followed and have several of their albums, and I like different periods of the band, but it should be on paper a band that I just absolutely fall in love with. They're an American band, really in that symphonic prog tradition, sound like classic Yes in a lot of spots, but for some reason, just some of their albums, maybe just because they have such a prolific output, just some of their albums never connect with me, just don't quite sound like the music that I appreciate as much. And I've just found myself struggling with some of their albums, so it's been somewhat of a difficult road. And I also want to mention Gaspacho in this conversation, a band that does maybe a bit more of an atmospheric, dreamier soundscape, which sometimes my mind kind of wanders and I want something a little bit more grounded, a little bit more rock-oriented, and just a lot of the things I've heard from Gaspacho haven't really connected deeply with me and have been a little bit boring and just not quite as interesting as I would have hoped. But I still am trying their records, and I'm still trying to get into them desperately. But at number 5 in the official list here, I've got Coheed Cambria on my list here, which I've bought records from them in the past. They're a band that's always been on my radar. I think maybe you could call them prog adjacent rather than fully fledged progressive rock, but a lot of people throw them in with progressive rock. And I should love the fact that they have this like string of concept records that all tie together. They have this overarching conceptual story that all their albums are kind of tied through, which is something that I should absolutely adore. A lot of Deer Hunter fans cite Coheed Cambria as one of their favorites, and I'm an absolute just super fan of the Deer Hunter. But for whatever reason, I just can't connect with a lot of Coheed Cambria. A lot of it sounds very samey. A lot of it sounds just really kind of that generic, early 2000s alternative rock kind of stuff to me, and doesn't really have the full-fledged progginess that I come for my music for. So a lot of their music just doesn't sound supremely progressive to me. Even though I like the storytelling and I like some of the more catchy rock songs that they come up with, but overall I just don't find their music to be particularly deep or have a connection with me personally, even though I respect and appreciate what they do. And I know it's more of a me problem. I'm not criticizing the band and what they put out there, but just more so my taste and how I'm just not really connecting with a lot of their output. At number 4, I've talked about it recently. I'm putting King Crimson on the list. I just really can't connect with a lot of King Crimson music. There's albums here and there. I understand their debut and why it's such a seminal, important release in progressive rock history, and I like it largely. But a lot of spots in their discography, it's too avant-garde, it's too out there, just doesn't have those like enriching like musical hooks that really dig deep into me. I like their album Red. I think it's a cool album. There's smatterings of things here and there, but I just largely can't connect with a good majority of their discography. It's just too angular, too cold and sterile at times, and I just haven't really felt that deep emotional connection that I'm looking for with my music. But I really respect what they do. I'm really impressed by the sounds they come up with and the creativity, but it just leaves me a little bit cold, if I'm being honest, in my musical exploration. At number 3, I have the Pineapple Thief. A really cool band, and I always expected them to sound very similar to like Porcupine Tree, and I just find a lot of their music to sound a bit samey. I kind of like with Coheed Cambria, I just don't find it overtly progressive, at least in the conventional sense. It sounds just kind of like really well done alternative rock music at times. But it's really well crafted. It sounds really good. They have great sound design. I like some of their more recent works with Gavin Harrison now on drums, because I think he adds another layer to their sound. So I really respect what they do. I enjoy listening to it, but I never come away like thinking, oh, this was just amazing and one of my favorite things that I've heard. I always find it pleasant and enjoyable, but like I couldn't really tell you any songs from them that grabbed me in particular, because they just don't really stick with me as a lot of other music does. But I do have several of their records in my collection, and I do listen to them. And they have a new EP coming out that I'm gonna listen to, certainly. And so I respect the band. And that's the case with a lot of these groups, is I respect the band. I have a lot of admiration for them, and I see why they're so popular, but for some reason it just hasn't fully connected with me to the point where, oh, this is one of my favorite bands of all time. Number 2, I have Pain of Salvation, a band that I actually really loved earlier on, like early 2000s, when I was first getting into prog and prog metal. I thought this was like one of the premier bands, and I loved Remedy Lane and Perfect Element Part 1. But over time, my tastes have just morphed and adapted to different things, and those albums just don't connect with me in the same way they used to. And I feel like from that point forward, just all their albums just have left me a bit cold. Sometimes they get into weird experiments like B that I just don't connect with. I appreciate the genius and what they're trying to accomplish, but musically, it's just something I don't care to sit and repeat listen to very much. It was cool one time through to just get the experience and the vibe of it, but it's just not something I return to. Their Road Salt albums felt like just kind of standard rock music that didn't really have a lot that gripped me in a progressive sense. There's certain songs I think are beautiful and really well done, but just all in all, Scarsick was one of the records that just had a bit of like this new metal aesthetic that just kind of put me off a little bit. They've had some recent albums that have been a little bit better, but it's just not really my kind of music. It's a little bit darker, and sometimes in the more recent albums a bit industrial, and just kind of left me cold in a lot of ways. I'm impressed by it. I think there's some cool stuff when you dig into it, but they've really gone away from being one of my favorites like they were back in the early 2000s. And I don't think the band's changed. I don't think they're any worse or different than they used to be. I think it's just my taste and my evolution as a progressive rock fan that I've just kind of gone away from that sound. And I found that in general for a lot of the progressive metal that I used to like a lot as a young teenager. Maybe it was because I was a bit more angsty and could really relate more to the heavier sounds. But now as I'm aging and getting older, I just find that to be too harsh to my ears. I just like more uplifting and positive music generally. And so I've shied away from it in recent years. So should be a band I should still continue to love, but just hasn't really continued to connect with me over the years. And finally, at number 1, probably the most controversial, the one that most people are massive fans of, and I know I have tons of like really big super fans of this band in my audience here, and it's Marillion. This has been like the one big quest of my progressive rock career, is trying to understand the appeal of Marillion and why they're such a huge band in the progressive rock space. And I've come to terms with it a bit better recently. I've really come to appreciate them lately. I did a whole album ranking of their catalog with notes. I believe we did that one together, so you could see that on their channel. But it really brought some appreciation to some albums that I'd never heard from their catalog. But their catalog has always been a bit hit or miss with me. And the whole debate of Fish era versus Hogarth era is a little bit strange to me. It's like two different bands almost. But both have their qualities that make me like not completely put my whole heart into their music. I know a lot of people say you got to see them live and that will transform you and make you a huger fan because that's where they really shine. I saw them live on Cruise to the Edge. It was a good show. I enjoyed it, but it wasn't like a transcendent experience. It was pleasant. It was good. Hogarth was really quirky and interesting as a frontman, but it just didn't convert me to being like a true blue, like huge Marillion fan. And I loved their latest album, An Hour Before It's Dark. I think it's a great album. I think it showcases some of the best of what they do, but for some reason it just isn't catapulting them into the pantheon of my favorite artists. I just can't get into them at that level, even though I respect and appreciate what they do. And this is the band where I probably have the most Marillion records out of all these groups that I've talked about. I have a lot of their catalog in my collection, and I'm proud to. And I like a lot of their works. I love the album Brave, and I think Clutching at Straws is a really underrated classic. And I like Marbles. I think that's a fantastic newer era album. But all in all, it just doesn't connect with me on the same level as the superstars in my mind of what I love in the genre. And maybe once again, it's because it's a bit more melancholy, a bit more slower paced at times, not quite as exciting. I tend to like prog that has a bit more of a positive angle, that has more of a rock feel to it as well. And Marillion, for some reason, just has never really fully been my favorite group. But I apologize. I know it's a tough take because a lot of people love them, but it's just been the one band that I've always, throughout my whole prog career, because I started loving prog by getting into Transatlantic, and I wanted to love all the bands that made up Transatlantic, and one of them, of course, is Marillion from Pete Trewavas, and it's been the one out of that grouping that I just haven't really ever fully fallen for. I love Dream Theater, I love Flower Kings, I love Spock's Beard. Those are probably my 3 top tier favorite bands, but Marillion is the clear odd one out, if that makes. And I just haven't really gotten it even now. But I've come to appreciate it. I try my best to at least have some appreciation for every band and to like something that they do. So all of these groups have something interesting on offer, but just don't fully fledged connect with me. And that's my episode today. Hopefully you guys aren't too triggered by it. Like I said, I'm not saying any of these bands are bad. I think these are incredible bands. I think they're fantastic, and they have clear fan bases for a reason. They're some of the premier best prog bands, but they just don't connect with me, unfortunately. Thank you guys so much. Hopefully you'll catch me in a future episode, and I'll see you there. Bye, everybody. Enjoy the music.